everybody, thanks for coming back to my channel. I'm Rachel Seaver. Hopefully you like my new background. I've been playing with it a little bit and with the lighting, so hopefully you guys like what you see. Let me know in the comments down below if I'm easier to see and easier to hear. I'm trying to give you guys a quality product in addition to giving you a solid book review. And the book review I'm bringing this week is The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. Let me just double check and make sure that is the title. It's kind of a long title. The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. Yes, that is indeed the correct name of the book. This book was so much fun to consume. Now, just as a disclaimer, I did not read this book. I am giving you an audiobook review. The reason why I didn't read the physical copy was just because of time. But I think that choosing the audiobook was absolutely the best thing I could have done because I'll get into this a little bit more as I progress in the review, but the voice actress who read this book did a fantastic job and I think just amped up my enjoyment of the story overall. So more about that later. What is this book about? Well, the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires takes place in a relatively small town / suburb in the South in the United States in the late 1980s to mid 1990s, early to mid 1990s. And the protagonist, the main character, is a woman named Patricia Campbell. She is a housewife who is in her mid 30s, and she has two children who are elementary school and high school aged at the start of the story. So she starts to get a little bit bored with her day-to-day life as a mother and a housewife. And one other thing that's worth mentioning, in addition to kind of taking care of the household, she's also the primary caregiver for her elderly mother-in-law who's suffering from dementia. So she's feeling really cooped up. She wants to get out. She wants to do more. She doesn't have a job outside of the home. So she finds a book club. And the book club is comprised of other women who are of a similar age. Some of them are also housewives. Some of them have part-time jobs outside the home as well. But anyway, it's just a group of women who get together and discuss books. Kind of standard, kind of typical, right? Then, the horror story starts. A man moves in the neighborhood and all of these crazy, horrible things start happening to Patricia and her family members. And through the sequence of events, Patricia and the woman that she's hired as a housekeeper start to suspect that there's something really not right about this neighbor who's moved into their community. His name is James Harris. And it's not giving away a spoiler, but James Harris is a vampire. And the rest of the story takes place over several years, explaining how Patricia confronts the vampire, things that happen, and it is just sort of from there on out, after the setup, it is a classic vampire horror story. There's definitely some humor thrown in, and I really like that it was told from the perspective of a housewife. There's some frustrating things that happen in this book, but I think it is a great, juicy vampire story. So why did I read this book? Well, I picked it out because it was getting a lot of really interesting reviews, and I love vampire lore and mythology, and so I thought, why not give it a try? Not only that, but I had read some interviews by the author, Grady Hendrix, and I think, I'm not going to get a direct quote, but it might even be in the foreword of the book, but I read somewhere that he wanted to write a story about what would happen if his mother encountered Dracula. And the idea of that really intrigued me. So I listened to a 5-minute sample on Audible, and I was going to go out and buy the physical hard copy of the book, but listening to that 5-minute sample of the reading, I was like, oh no, something about this woman's voice, who is the narrator, her name is Bonnie Turpin, really kind of caught my ear. Bonnie Turpin's reading of this book was incredible. Not only is she a talented actress, and that really comes across in her reading, but every single character had their own voice, their own intonation. Every single woman in the book club had a slightly different accent. You could tell she was changing the shape of her mouth to make a character named Kitty sound really different from the main character, Patricia. Even when she was reading the voices of men, she had to make her voice a little bit deeper, but it was consistent throughout the whole book. James Harris, the vampire character, always sounded the same. Patricia's husband, Carter, always sounded the same. And so it just was really engaging. I never felt like I was struggling to pay attention or keep track of the story, keep track of what characters were talking, keep track of the perspective, because this book is written from sort of a third person narrative, meaning that as you're reading it, it's not first person. Patricia's not saying like, I went into the room, I did this, but the narrator's telling you like, Patricia walked into the room and then Patricia did this. But not every single chapter is from Patricia's perspective. So there are some chapters and even scenes, particularly fight scenes, where the narrator's jumping into the heads of different characters. And I think Grady Hendrix did a really great job of making that distinction really apparent. But then on top of that, Bonnie Turpin did an excellent job of guiding the listener through what was happening in these action sequences. So if you haven't read this book yet and you have the opportunity to listen to it on audiobook, I would highly recommend listening to it on audiobook if that's something that you like to do, if listening to stories is something you enjoy, because I think it just I think if I had just read this book, it would have been maybe a 7 out of 10 for me. But listening to it on audiobook with Bonnie Turpin's reading brought it to like a 10 out of 10. Like, that's how much I enjoyed this book. I liked it so much that I was actually bummed out when it was over. Because I think the audiobook is something like 13 hours long. So for 13 hours, I'd been listening to these characters in this story. And I was so like... I just missed it when it was over. I missed her narration. I missed the story. I missed the characters, and I wanted more. And Grady Hendrix has other books. I'm definitely going to go read one of his. I think My Best Friend's Exorcism is the one that came out right before the current book, The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. And so I'm going to read that. But now also, like, I have to listen to more books that she's narrated. That's what an amazing job she did. So some other books that she's done narration for are The Help, The Hate You Give, Children of Blood and Bone. I've not read any of these books. Obviously, I've heard of them before. Children of Blood and Bone like blew up a few years ago, and I just wasn't at a place in my life where I could do a lot of reading, but I've been interested. I guess you could say that's been on my TBR for a while. Now I'm definitely listening to it on audiobook. Now that I know Bonnie Turpin is involved, oh my gosh. So I feel like I should start a Bonnie Turpin fan club, and we should just be promoting her to do more book narrations, because this is I don't think I've enjoyed listening to a book this much since I listened to a couple of the Song of Ice and Fire on audiobook a while back. At any rate, the audiobook is incredible. Another thing that I really, really liked about this story were the vampires themselves. So this vampire, James Harris, was straight up evil. Like, he was not sparkly. He was not like a gothic, I'm gonna try to seduce you with my sad boy behavior, like Bram Stoker's Dracula interpretation by Francis Ford Coppola from the early 90s. And I might put off some fans of the True Blood series here. I don't have anything against that show, but I did read the Sookie Stackhouse novel, the first one, back when it came out, like 20 years ago now, 15 years ago maybe, and I did not like it. I didn't like her writing. I didn't like the way the vampires were portrayed. I just didn't like the story. I was just like very put off by it. I never read any others. This vampire is very much just like straight up evil. His only concern is to consume. He's not quite as like evil as your 30 Days of Night vampires that just go in and like devour a whole town on the Alaskan tundra, but that is kind of the perspective from which Grady Hendrix has written him. Like, there's nothing redeeming about this character. Obviously he is handsome and attractive. He's very charming, but he kind of has to be in order to live in the world, right? So I really liked the way that the vampire was approached in this story. Again, it's not your sparkly vampire. It's not your like, oh, my heart longs for you. Oh, because you're my dead princess, and I've traveled through oceans of time to find you type of vampire. Nah, this motherfucker is interested in one thing and one thing only: consuming as much as he can get his hands on, be it blood, be it money, be it people's time, be it their trust. To quote the Rocky Horror Picture Show, he just takes, and drains everyone of their love and emotions. Like, he is straight up evil. So if you are looking for a vampire story that has a fucking evil vampire in it, this is a book I think you will really enjoy. What did I write here as a... I cannot read my handwriting. Gone? The girl? The gnome? What did I write? Anyway, so I kind of already mentioned this when I was talking about Bonnie Turpin's writing, but another thing that I really liked in this book were the action sequences. There are, I would say, off the top of my head from remembering, about 3 pretty big, significant action sequences in this book. For all of them, Grady Hendrix gives excellent description of not only what the characters are doing in the scene, but what else is happening in the scene, from the smells, the sights, the sounds. Like, you really feel like you're being pulled into the horror by his descriptions. But like I also mentioned, he does a great job of weaving what's going on in these action sequences to make it that it's very easy for you to follow while you're reading. I think sometimes we take for granted, because, you know, we watch television or see fight scenes in TV shows or movies, like how hard it is to describe what's happening in those fight scenes. And if you had to describe it in real life, it would be impossible to catch every detail. And a writer isn't going to want to describe every detail, because you're going to get bored and stop reading. But Grady Hendrix gives you enough detail and enough insight in what's happening inside the character's head to keep you really engaged, and to make these action sequences and fight scenes seem like they're happening really quickly in real time, even though they may span what's probably 5 or 6 pages. So I think the action in this book was incredibly well written. Now for one con. The only thing that really pulled me out of this book and made me kind of question it a little bit was the book club itself, the housewives and the book club. I don't want to give any spoilers, but it's hard for me to believe that of all of the women in this book club, not one of them besides Patricia would have tried to stand up to this vampire. And even Patricia goes a very, very long time before she gets to the major confrontation in the book where she puts herself in a position to fight back. It was just hard for me to believe that every character was as passive as Grady Hendrix wrote them. That seemed a little unrealistic. And I think you could maybe get to the justification of like, well, he's talking about a certain type of woman in another place and time. And you could argue that maybe those women weren't as empowered as women of the same age would be today. But I have to call bullshit on that, because in the mid-90s, my mom was the age these women are, and my mom was a fucking badass. So maybe it was just a convenience for the plot that all of the housewives in the book club were written as very, very passive women. And I get that, and I don't think that... My view on this wasn't that Grady Hendrix was being misogynistic in this in any way. I just think it was... maybe necessary to the plot as he developed it. But it was a little unrealistic to me that every single wife in the book club would be so passive. And you'll understand what I mean when you read the book. Now, there was one character who I feel like was kind of like the voice of reason in all of this, and that was the housekeeper slash domestic helper that Patricia hired to help her take care of her elderly mother-in-law. And that character's name is Mrs. Green. Mrs. Green is the only female character who from the beginning has any sense about her. And that's the woman I saw my mother in, knowing my mother, how she was in the mid-90s. Like, my mom would have not tolerated that bull crap. She would have gotten the hell out of Dodge, or gotten me the hell out of Dodge, just like Mrs. Green did with her children when it seemed like spooky vampire evil shit was going down. So who might like this book? Well, if you're looking to read a book that doesn't have cuddly, sparkly vampires, I think you'll like this. If you like your vampires dark and super evil, but you like a little bit of humor with your horror, I think you'd also like it. Additionally, anyone who likes audiobooks, no matter the genre, definitely listen to this. There aren't any jump scares in this book. I think the scariest thing about it is how the gore is described. Some of the scenes where just like gnarly shit is happening to people, the descriptions on that are mwah if you like horror. But that's the scariest thing about this book. It is kind of predictable. You know where it's going. It's not like you're gonna get shocked into reading something you weren't expecting. So I would recommend anyone who likes audiobooks overall, check this out, even if you're not a fan of horror. Thanks so much for coming back to my channel, guys. I really appreciate it. Leave me a comment down below if there are any other vampire books that you really liked that you think I would like. Or if you've read this book and you loved it, what did you like about it? Or if you read this book and you hated it, what did you hate about it? Maybe there's something I didn't consider. So anyway, thanks for watching, and until I see you next time, go read a book.